Hey guys, do you remember where we left off? We were in the battle, and Aslan said, "Girls, get off my back," and he charged. And who was he fighting? The witch. It was the ultimate good versus evil. Aslan and the witch. And here's where we ended. The battle was over in a few minutes after their arrival. Of course it was, because that was Aslan, the king of Narnia. Most of the enemy had been killed in the first charge of Aslan and his companions. And when those who were still living saw the witch was dead, they either gave themselves up or took flight. They ran away. The next thing that Lucy knew was that Peter and Aslan were shaking hands. Wow. It was strange to see Peter looking as he looked now. His face was so pale and stern, and he seemed so much older. He had just led a battle. He had matured quite fast. "It was all Edmund's doing, Aslan," Peter was saying. "We had been beaten if it hadn't been for him." Wow, what do you think Edmund did? Pretty cool that in the end of the story, Edmund turns around, huh? "The witch was turning our troops into stone right and left, but nothing would stop them. He fought his way through 3 ogres to where she just turning around onto one leopard. There was 3 ogres, and she was turning to turn a leopard into a statue, and Edmund fought himself through 3 ogres. And when he reached her, he had the sense to bring his sword smashing down on her wand instead of trying to fight her directly and simply getting made into a statue for himself. So he was so wise, wasn't he? He was like, what's the thing that's really causing the problem? Is the witch that strong, or is it her magic wand? And so he got the wand. That was the mistake all the rest of us were making. They were trying to fight her. Once her wand was broken, we began to have some chance. If we hadn't lost so many already. Edmund was terribly wounded. We must go and see him then. They found Edmund in charge of Mrs. Beaver, away back from the fighting line. He was covered with blood. His mouth was open and his face was a nasty green color. "Quick, Lucy," said Aslan. What could Lucy do you think? You guys remember? All right. And then, almost for the first time, Lucy remembered the precious cordial that had been given to her for a Christmas present. Remember when the Father Christmas gave them their gifts? He said, only use them when you need to use them. These are not toys. Her hands trembling so much that she could hardly undo the stopper, but she managed it and in the end poured a few drops into her brother's mouth. "There are other people wounded," said Aslan, while she was still looking eagerly into Edmund's pale face and wondering if the cordial would have any result. "Yes, I know," said Lucy crossly. "Wait a minute." So she's looking at her brother going, "I just want to see if Edmund's okay." And here's what Aslan says. "Daughter of Eve," said Aslan in a graver voice, "others also are at the point of death. Must more people die for the sake of Edmund?" "I'm sorry," Aslan said Lucy, getting up and going with him. And for the next half an hour they were very busy, she attending to the wounded, while he restored all those who'd been turned to stone. Wow, could you imagine? Aslan and Lucy out there healing everyone. When at last she was free to come back to Edmund, she found him standing on his feet and not only healed, but his wounds, but they looked better than she had seen him look for ages. So not only were his wounds healed, but he looked better. That was some cordial. In fact, ever since her first term at that horrid school, which was where he had begun going wrong. Remember, they said, ever since you've been at this school, you've been teasing younger children and going wrong. His whole heart had changed. He had become his real old self again and could look you in the face. And there, on the field of battle, Aslan made him a knight. Do you remember when he had Peter kneel down and laid the sword on his shoulders? He did the same thing for Edmund. Now Edmund was a knight too. "Does he know," whispered Lucy to Susan, "what Aslan did for him? Does he know what the arrangement with the witch really was?" "Hush, no, of course not," said Susan. "Ought he be told?" said Lucy. "Oh, surely not," said Susan. "It would be too awful for him. Think of how you'd feel if you were he." "All the same, I think he ought to know," said Lucy. But at that moment they were interrupted. That night, what do you think? Do you think that they should tell Edmund that what he did caused Aslan to have to die on the stone table? Or do you think that we should not tell him? Talk to your mom and dad about that and see what happens. That night, they slept where they were. How Aslan provided food for them all, I don't know. But somehow or another, they found themselves all sitting down on the grass to a fine high tea at about 8 o'clock. I love it. They're in England, so they have high tea, right? The next day, they began marching eastward down the side of the great river, and the next day after that, at about tea time, they actually reached the mouth of the river. The castle of Cair Paravel on its little hill towered above them. Before them were the sands with the rocks and the little pools of salt water and seaweed and the smell of the sea, and long miles of bluish-green waves breaking for ever and ever on the beach. And oh, the cry of seagulls! Have you heard it? Can you remember the cry of seagulls? That evening after tea, the 4 children all managed to get down to the beach again and get their shoes and stockings off and feel the sand between their toes. But the next day was more solemn. For then, in the great hall of Cair Paravel, that wonderful hall with the ivory roof and the west wall hung with peacock's feathers, and the eastern door which looked toward the sea, in the presence of all their friends, and to the sound of trumpets, Aslan solemnly crowned them and led them to the 4 thrones amid the deafening shouts of "Long live King Peter! Long live Queen Susan! Long live King Edmund! Long live Queen Lucy!" Yay! They finally made it. Once a king or queen in Narnia, always a king or queen. "Bear it well, sons of Adam, bear it well, daughters of Eve," said Aslan. And through the eastern door, which was wide open, came the voices of mermen and mermaids swimming close to the shore and singing in honor of their new kings and queens. So the children sat on their thrones, their scepters were put into their hands, and they gave rewards and honors to all their friends, to Tumnus the fawn, to the beavers, to the giant Rumblebuffin, to the leopards and the centaurs and the dwarves, and to the lion. And that night there was a great feast in Cair Paravel, and dancing and gold flashed and wine flowed, and answering to the music inside, but stranger, sweeter, and more piercing, came the music of the sea people. What do you think that sounded like? The mermaids and mermen? But amid all this rejoicing, Aslan himself quietly slipped away. And when the kings and queens noticed that he wasn't there, they said nothing about it. For Mr. Beaver had warned them. "He'll be coming and going," he had said. "One day you'll see him here, and another you won't. He doesn't like being tied down, and of course he has other countries to attend to. It's quite all right. He'll often drop in. Only you mustn't press him. He's wild, you know, not a tame lion." And we will finish this book the next time, guys. Beautiful to think of them being crowned kings and queens on the thrones of Cair Paravel. See you later, guys.